Hello, I'm Paul Zimmy Finn, and this is the Generation Report. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never. Klaus Schwab, COVID-19, The Great Reset. Mark Twain famously once wrote, quote, "Prediction is difficult, particularly when it involves the future," unquote. Yet while recognizing this obvious truth, and setting aside my own suspicion that Klaus Schwab has never read Mark Twain, it's only natural to guess what might come next at the end of a year like this one. Simply put, 2020 has been a historical inflection point of a magnitude not seen in a long time. And the film critic who wrote Time magazine's Year in Review article would not want to hear this, but if current events and trends are any indication and the crisis morphology presented in The Fourth Turning is any guide, America is in for even more turbulence ahead. Another American master of the one-liner, Dan Quayle, famously once said that the future will be better tomorrow. I hope he turns out to be right. A lot has been written and said in the last few weeks about the Great Reset. What is it? Briefly, the Great Reset is the name given to an initiative the World Economic Forum, led by founder and executive chairman Klaus Schwab, launched this summer, which has drawn the support of prominent political and corporate leaders from around the world. Its stated purpose is to facilitate a far-reaching set of solutions across industries and societies to address global inequality, climate change, and other challenges for the post-COVID-19 future. On the screen you'll see a list of just some of the prominent figures who have given their endorsement to the Great Reset. I've provided links in the description to the World Economic Forum's website and to Schwab's book for anyone interested in reading straight from the source. It stands to reason that we'll know very soon after the new administration assumes leadership in January what the extent of its commitment to the Great Reset is. But with or without the Great Reset, what seems assured is that the sense of social stasis which characterized the years prior to COVID-19 is over. In his 2017 book, The Complacent Class, Tyler Cowen observed, quote, "Most Americans don't like change very much unless it is on terms that they manage and control, and they now have the resources and the technology to manage their lives on this basis," unquote. But even beyond individual circumstances, Cohen assessed that millions of Americans had lost, quote, "the ability to imagine an entirely different world and physical setting and the broader opportunities for social and economic advancement that would entail," unquote. As a result of this strange mix of sentiments toward their personal lives and the world around them, more Americans than ever had retreated into themselves and dug in. But this sense of complacency, Cohen asserted, would only hold until instability returned, and instability has returned. But the loss of complacency and the return of instability will not resolve America's ongoing political problems, as pointed out by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Jared Diamond. Honest national self-appraisal is in quote-unquote short supply, declared Diamond in his 2019 book, Upheaval, Turning Points for Nations in Crisis. The prerequisite for honest national self-appraisal, he continued, was, quote-unquote, widespread agreement about our, quote-unquote, fundamental problems. One won't get the feeling from reading Upheaval that Diamond has read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And what does Diamond predict will happen to America? Quote, "That will depend on the choices we make," unquote. Great answer. If the political choices made in the years ahead apply the lessons of the progressive era, argues Dr. Robert Putnam in his 2020 book, The Upswing, a sense of shared values may finally re-emerge to bring revitalization to community and civic life. The crucial question, Dr. Putnam attests, is, quote, "whether we can resurrect the earlier communitarian virtues in a way that does not reverse the progress we've made in terms of individual liberties," unquote. As Ben Shapiro has argued, however, progressivism has become so directed toward expressing grievances and a sense of dissatisfaction with America as it is, that an upswing as described by Putnam probably cannot emerge from that school of ideas. The key issue, according to Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay in their 2020 book Cynical Theories, is that many of the modern progressive movements derive their vision of the world from postmodern philosophy, which rejects the principles of the Enlightenment in favor of theory, subjectivity, and group identity. As Lindsay, Heather McDonald, and others have chronicled extensively, these ideas are making greater and greater inroads into American society, and they're bringing a myriad of problems with them. Meanwhile, as 2020 winds down, social problems that transcend politics and the pandemic continue to wreak havoc. Loneliness, drug overdoses, homicides, suicides, and the rest. As for issues related to the virus and the vaccine, the economy, the environment, and all manner of threats from beyond our borders, those topics are better left to insiders and experts. Suffice to say, however, dangers abound, and they are not going away. Will a great reset resolve all of these uncertainties, problems, and dangers? Hardly. From reading the World Economic Forum's contributors to the initiative, however, you could almost be convinced that it will. One of those contributors, it turns out, is someone who catapulted to international recognition at the Forum's annual meeting in Davos in 2019, historian Rutger Bregman. As I did in the prior episode, I've attached links in the description to Bregman's two bestsellers, Utopia for Realists and Humankind: A Hopeful History, so that anyone interested can read his ideas in his own words. But the quality of Bregman's writing that might be the most striking? How similar it is, in terms of its style and its ideas, to COVID-19, the Great Reset. And rather than an isolated case, this resemblance is part of a larger pattern. Time magazine's Great Reset series, published in October, reads in a very similar way to Schwab and Bregman's bestsellers. The same is true of a 2016 article by a World Economic Forum contributor that has recirculated recently, which you can see on the screen. As for the World Economic Forum website and the Great Reset website, I encourage everyone to read them and decide for themselves. Many people have accused the Great Reset of being a conspiracy. Others have disparaged conversations about the Great Reset as conspiracy peddling. But distractions aside, the Great Reset initiative is real, and aspects of its platform may shape American policy in the years ahead. Perhaps the most important thing about the Great Reset, however, is that its architects and contributors all share a worldview, which Dr. Thomas Sowell has called the vision of the anointed. Although Schwab, Bregman, and others behind the Great Reset profess that they understand history, their ideas are contradictory in terms of coherence, consistency, and most important of all, in their assessment of human nature itself. By positing that people and societies are capable of undergoing innumerable fundamental changes to suit the social vision it prescribes, the Great Reset fundamentally lacks credibility. Of course, many people in positions of power and influence take the opposite view. It's not hard to see the potential for trouble this divergence of perspectives could bring. So now we come to the inescapable questions. Will the Great Reset platform be adopted by the new administration? Which social tensions and shifts might continue into the new year? Will there finally be a national reconciliation between the left and the right? What might finally bring about the great entropy reversal described by Strauss and Howe in The Fourth Turning? Will America still be the same intact united nation when this is all over? Which of the many possible alternative futures awaits? On the question of the Great Reset, my instinctive answer is yes, to some degree. The new administration's selection for Special Climate Envoy, John Kerry, has professed his support for the Great Reset, so it seems reasonable to assume there will be alignment between the U.S. and other nations on climate policy. Whether this alignment will officially produce a Green New Deal, I'm not equipped to say. As far as the other areas of the Great Reset platform, we'll have to wait and see. On the question of social tensions, I believe that the likelihood of another wave of mass protests in the year ahead is quite high. If I had to guess, the next wave of protests will be sparked by built-up anger over further lockdown measures, a sudden spike in job losses, a reaction to another arrest gone awry, or some combination of the three. In terms of the number and severity of confrontations between far-left and far-right groups, that will depend on which tensions are springing up and where. In terms of a social shift, I expect that the net effect of the lockdowns, the protests, and the specter of violence will cause the exodus from coastal urban centers to continue further. On the question of left versus right, there doesn't seem to be any kind of reconciliation in the near-term future. Not much more needs to be said there. On the question of an entropy reversal, this is where I'm pretty close to stumped. Given the extent of the divisions in the country, my fear is that there won't be an entropy reversal until an economic catastrophe brings another Great Depression or a serious foreign crisis erupts. By such a time, the trends which are worsening today could reach a point where the country is irrevocably altered. I hope that I'm wrong, but that's my fear. On the question of whether America will still be united and intact at the end of the crisis, my gut answer is yes, but with a caveat. In Coming Apart, Dr. Charles Murray forecasted, in a chapter entitled Alternative Futures, that eventually growing wealth inequality would bring such social and institutional pressures as to bring about a government that would be essentially, quote, indistinguishable from a European welfare state, unquote. I believe that is where America is headed as things stand today. I hope that Dr. Murray is wrong, and so am I. Whatever the future does hold for America, the critical point is we did not arrive at this point by accident. Decades before William Strauss and Neil Howe presented their theory of history in generations, radio legend Paul Harvey observed, quote, "Storms are part of the normal climate of life. We've got to learn to ride them," unquote. And so, here we are in the middle of a storm. The question is not so much how do we get ourselves out of it, but how do we ride it out together until it passes. I close with two quotations. The first from Herbert Agar's A Time for Greatness, published in 1942 during World War II. The second from The Fourth Turning. Everything is unknown about the future save this alone. If the American idea prevails, the future will offer man some dignity and some chance for self-improvement. And the American idea can only exist if we live it. History is seasonal, but its outcomes are not foreordained. Much will depend on how tall we stand in the trials to come. This concludes this phase of the podcast. Be sure to tune in for more in the new year. A big thank you to all my listeners and subscribers. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year to each of you. May God bless America.